the subject of today. Today I want to talk about a subject that affects a lot of people. In fact, I ended up on this subject because this is a natural byproduct of, we talked about special needs, and then we talk about depression, anxiety, and I was thinking, well, what comes next? And it seems like I'm on this mental health thing right now. I don't know why it is. Only the Lord knows. And so I want to talk about a subject that affects, everyone's been affected by this one way or another. Either you have or you know someone who's been affected by this thing. And there's some people who know it more personally than others. And there's probably people who are more experienced than me to talk about this, but the Lord laid it in my heart, so we're going to talk about addiction. Addiction is something that affects everyone. Addiction can be in many forms. A lot of times we think of the substance addiction, but it could also be psychological. It could be actions, a behavior, harmful physical things, and that can affect people psychologically and have a negative effect on your lives. And I think, would I be right? Everyone's been affected by this in some way, right? Friends, family, neighbor. It's one thing, depression affects a group of people and special needs, but this is the one, man, everyone's hit by it. There isn't a person that is not untouched by this. And that's why this was such a natural touchstone to the next one. And then later on, I'm going to explain why this relates to those other two. But first, before we get into addiction, and I do want to talk about this, is understanding that the problem with addiction is a problem of we've lost in the idea of temperance. The idea of temperance. You're like, what is temperance about it? And then we're going to talk about addiction. So temperance, it's a weird word. And then we don't really use it anymore. And when we think of temperance, oh, that's just avoiding alcohol altogether. That's what most people are thinking. But actually the word temperance really means this: a moderation in action and thought or feelings, a habitual moderation in indulgence of appetites or passion. In other words, temperance is self-control. Temperance is really, in a sense, self-control. And that's something our culture, our society is lacking, the idea of temperance, self-control. It also means balance. It's not, you're not going to one extreme or the other extreme, which is where people end up in addiction. They swing too far one way. Before I get to that, I hope you understand temperance or self-control better. If you go to King James Bible, it will say temperance, which I like as a word. But if you go to your modern translation, in your Bible, everywhere where it used to say temperance, it says self-control. So I'm going to read just a couple passages on this. First is 2 Peter 1:5 through 7. It says, "For now, this very reason also apply all diligence in your faith, supplying moral excellence, and in your moral excellence, knowledge, and in your knowledge, self-control." Oops. "And in your self-control, perseverance, and perseverance, godliness, and godliness, brotherly kindness, and brotherly kindness is love." But you notice the godly character, a very important godly character, is self-control. A self-control that controls your action, that doesn't allow you to go into extremes that we tend to end up in. So we need to be self-control or temperate. The next one is Galatians. And in Galatians 5:22 to 23 says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And against such things there is no law." Self-control, temperance. This is a very important quality. It's a quality that we often forget, but it's so important. It is one of the few fruits of the Spirit is self-control. Not giving to urges, not giving into indulgences. And one more, Titus 1:8. Titus 1:8 says, and Paul is talking to what are the elders to be like? Well, how will we describe the elders? And he says, the elders should be hospitable, loving, what is good, sensible, right, holy, and self-control, or temperate. And we can see we have self-control or temperance was an important factor in the Christian life. In fact, in Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8, do I have that one? Nope, I don't. In Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8, it's this famous one where it says, there's an appointed time for everything. There's a time for every matter under the heavens, a time to give birth, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to tear down, a time to build up. And it's just this talk about, and Ecclesiastes, that there's a time for everything, and it's kind of talking about this balance. There's a balance, and there's right times for everything. And so it's that self-control, that temperance, that we don't want to swing too far left or right. Now, to help you understand this idea of temperance real quick, a lot of times what sin is and what addiction is when good things go amok. That Satan likes twisting things that are good. So, for example, food is good, right? Food is good for nourishment. But if you eat too much and you're eating a lot of it and you just can't stop eating, it leads to gluttony. Food is good, but it can lead somewhere not good. Work is a good thing. Unless you're working night and day and night, and you never come home, never take care of your family, don't take care of your body breaks down, your marriage breaks up, and now you become a workaholic, and so work can become a bad thing. Shopping. I was just talking to someone on the phone, and he admitted that he and his wife had a shopping. They just like buying. They got this little thing called credit card. They start spending. And it's good to buy stuff to take care of your family, but when you start putting yourself in debt, it becomes a bad thing. A good thing becoming a bad thing. Sex is a good thing within the confines of marriage. It helps unite a marriage. It nurtures a marriage, and it's something very much a good thing. But when sex goes outside of a marriage, that's when it becomes bad. That's when it leads to affairs and pornography. That's when it comes out. But sex itself is a good thing. And we can continue. We can talk about media. We can talk about the news. We can talk about social media, which is really a real struggle for a lot of young people. Social media, which can be good, it keeps you track of family. But what they found is more young people are becoming more depressed and more anxious and more addicted to these things more now than ever. It's a good thing. Cell phones are even a good thing, but they can go bad. They become addiction. And so that's why when we talk about addiction, we often think about the chemical stuff like drinking, drugs, and we think, oh, but a lot of things can become, gambling, as long as it's like a friendly bet, like me and Richard, our bet is Giants will beat the Dodgers, and if I win, Richard gets me lunch, what has never happened. We're going on 3, right? I hope I win this time. But a friendly wager like that is okay. It's when I'm starting to get myself in debt that becomes a problem. When I put my family life in danger, that's when gambling becomes a problem. Video games. Now there's something of my generation and older that's become a real big problem for young people. They really are addicted. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. So there's something that could be good, because there's nothing wrong with video games. You can play, that's all right. Even drugs, if it's used correctly, like for pain or something, can be good. But it's when people abuse it, when we're not being temperate or self-control, that's when it becomes wrong. Now, one of the things I want to admit while I'm here, my drug of choice would be coffee. And by the way, it is a drug. By the way, it is caffeinated. It is addicting. I try 2 cups of coffee. But if I start having 4, 5, 6, if I have the kettle up here with me, that would not be good. That would not be healthy. I might need to have a conversation with someone. Coffee is a good thing, but even that can be bad for you. It can damage your body. And so we need to understand what temperance is before we get into addiction. Because addiction is basically the temperance has not gone effect. Self-control has gone them out, and now we're all the way over here. And what we need to understand is we need to pull back and be in self-control and be in temperance. So one of the things I want you to understand as you go through this long list, I'm going to go back to that long list, is I want you to understand that there are many kinds of addiction, and we always just think of drinking and drugs, but all those are also addictions. I know my father-in-law is addicted to the news. I love my father-in-law, but we wake up, he's watching news. In the afternoon, he's watching news. In the evening, he's watching news. What is this conversation? About what's on the news. Well, I want to have a different conversation with him. Likely, eventually turns to golf, which is fine. But it's become, his whole life has been developed, and it's an unhealthy addiction. And maybe some of you guys know about that. Maybe you guys have been too involved in the news. And by the way, one of the things you guys need to understand, and this is a side note, me and Annette don't have TV at home. We don't watch the news at home. The closest I get to watch the news is whatever pops up on my Facebook. And guess what? My knowing about most of it is pointless. The only thing I really need to know is what's going on with my church, what's going on in my town. I have no effect on what's in Washington, D.C. A lot of you are worried about Washington, D.C. And it's caused you angst, and it's caused you concern. And it's not doing you any good, and you have no effect what's going on in Washington, D.C. Some of you just need to chill out and turn off the TV. And guess what? I know for some of you, the news is addiction, because me saying not watching TV just got you like, how could he not watch the news? You have to be informed, right? Why? My grandma watches the news all the time. She wants to be informed. Does she have any input with it? Does it help her vote? Guess what? All I need to vote are the principles of those who are being elected. I don't need to know every minutia. I don't. And when I need more details, I go to Steve. I say, Steve, give me more information. And by the way, what I get from Steve is far better than what I get in the news. The news is so inept. Steve is so much a direct source, which is our blessing. That's half the conversation on trustees meeting. Right, Steve? Okay, tell us what's going on. And I get all taken care of in a half an hour and I'm done. I don't have to worry about the news for a while. I'm not saying don't be informed, but some of you need not be obsessed about it. So I'm just going to move on from that because we want to now go on to what about biblically about addiction. Oh, and I want to say I already said there's two types of addictions that one is active behavior or activity behavior or chemical addiction. So when we think about chemical activities, we're thinking about people who are addicted to their social media. We're thinking about people who are addicted to gambling. We're thinking about people addicted to shopping or sex or work or food. Those are activities that you can be addicted to. Now, let me say, if I ask a psychologist, I'll say, well, that's a chemical addiction too. And it is, because it's a dopamine hit. You didn't realize there's a reason why you get addicted to it, because you get a hit of dopamine when things happen. On your phone, whenever you get a like on your post, like ding, ooh, you get a hit of dopamine. And so that's why you find it stimulating. So there's still a chemical there, but what the other chemical addictions we think about, let's get ahead of myself. When we think about chemical addictions, we're thinking about alcohol, smoking, marijuana, crystal meth, which I don't know if meth is a big thing here, but in California, it was a big thing, especially in Central California. It's huge. It's huge here too. I know you would know. And man, what it does to people, it is huge. So but the thing that's different from the activities that are behavior addictions versus the chemical addictions, it actually is starting to change your brain chemistries. And so when eventually, if you take a break of addictive behaviors, eventually your body gets used to not getting a dopamine hit and it evens out a little sooner. Chemical addictions, it's actually your brains and your body's been rewired. And so to kick it is not an easy process. It's very hard. That's why when you say, why can't you just stop? They can't. They really can't. Because their whole body has been transformed by this chemical. And of course, if you ever see someone who's been had meth, and I've looked at in person, and what does to their body, you're like, yeah, it's completely ravaged it. And it's completely transformed them. But what I want to talk about first, some biblical, I gotta have my biblical stuff. Okay, when we go to, maybe I did, hold on, there we go. That's the one I want. 1 Corinthians 6:12. What is the biblical problem with addiction? Well, Paul says this, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are profitable for me. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. In other words, there's nothing in the Bible, if we look at that list, that says you can't do food, or can't do shopping, or you can't do gambling. You can't find a Bible verse that says don't do this. However, you should not be mastered by it. Now, what does it mean by mastered? Controlled. These sins should not control your actions. You should be controlled by who? It should be controlled by God. But when these things become so addictive, where it controls your life, your behavior, your character, your job, your family, how you're living life, it can quite literally, your whole mind gets wrapped around these addictive things, and they are the ones who really control, not you. Proverbs 20 verse 1 says, wine is a mocker, strong drinker is a brawler, whoever is led astray by it is not wise. One of the things, and alcohol is a main, if we go to the Bible, alcohol is a main addictive thing that it talks about. But we can talk about a lot of addictive things. It's just the primary one. But what it was saying is, it can cause, wine or alcohol can make you a mocker. It's in control of you. It can make you a brawler because it's in control. It can lead you astray because it's controlling your action, because you're no longer thinking straight. In fact, one of the things that, of course, alcohol does, it's inhibitive, and you don't usually think the way you normally do. You don't act the way you normally would. And you think, well, why do you do that? Why are you always getting fights at the bar or something? Well, you're not thinking straight, because the alcohol is inhibiting your ability to say, this is stupid. I shouldn't be getting in a fight. It's affecting your prefrontal cortex. It also talks about in Proverbs 23:21 that it leads to poverty. A lot of people who are addictive to certain things will quickly find them in poverty, because this thing, whatever addictive thing, we're talking about drug, alcohol, or gambling, or social media, or game, it consumes you so much that you don't do anything about taking care of yourself, and you lead to poverty. Or even worse, it talks about in Proverbs 7:18-19, you'll know the story, that it talks about how this woman lures this man in with alcohol into an affair. A lot of men who end up in affairs, or women end up in an affair, one of the main things that led them there was alcohol, because alcohol took away those inhibitions, and now they end up in relationships that normally they would never be about. In fact, the biggest cause of crime, death, is alcohol. When alcohol is introduced into any scenario, all those statistics go up. And so that's why addiction is such an important thing. Now, that's not just alcohol, but anything that controls your behavior. I remember seeing a video where there's this boy who was addicted to video games. I mean, hardcore. And he would get so angry, he'd punch holes in the wall. He would get in arguments with his mom because he was so addicted, and his mind is so addicted to the dopamine, and when he lost, he would go into his fight or flight mode, and he would just be angry, and and it was in control of him. He wasn't, the addiction was. And so as Christians, that should not be the case. We should not be allowing anything to control us other than Christ. Let's see, did I have, I do. Let's see. Oh, okay. So I think I left it off of here, but let's see. Oh, yes. Okay, cool. See, I didn't look at that PowerPoint enough. So, in Galatians 5:17, it says this: for the flesh, it sets desires against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. For there are in opposition to one another, so that you do not do not the things you want, but the things you do are, he talks about this fight, this inner fight in between that you want to do something, but you don't do the thing you want to do because this flesh is set against the spirit, and so it is controlling your behavior instead of you being in control, instead of God being in control, instead of the spirit control. This addiction is in control. And then later on, it also talks about in, what verse is this? 1 Corinthians 6:9-10, it says, now this is an important thing, because not only are you not supposed to give anything else control, but there's a danger spiritually. It says, do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be seen near the sexual immoral, nor the adulterer, nor the effeminate, nor the homosexual, nor the thieves, nor the greedy, nor the drunkard, nor the reviler, nor the swindler will inherit the kingdom of God. In other words, a person who is being controlled by their sin, and being controlled by their addiction, there's a red flag that maybe they're not saved. Now, I'm not saying that's the case. That is not to say that some people might just fall off the wagon. Maybe they're going to get back on. But it's a red flag of this isn't good, because these people who this defines their life might be jeopardizing the kingdom of heaven. Maybe they're not saved, and they need to be aware of it. If anything, you might be need to preach the gospel. And then in Mark 6:24 makes it clear, no one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate one or love the other, or he'll be devoted one or despise the others. Now, he's talking about money in this passage, but that's the same thing with any of these addictions. You can either love your addiction or you can love God. You can't love your addiction and God. You can love God, but not your addiction. But you have to choose. Who are you going to serve? Are you going to serve God, or are you going to serve your addiction? And so we see that it affects your relationship. It might be a bad sign of your salvation. It is controlling your life. And so the Bible says, don't be addicted to anything, but be clear and sober-minded. Now, we're going to take a break from some Bible passages. We're going to come back to some, but I want to talk about I talked about the two kind of addictions, which is addictive behavior, and then I talked about chemical addictions. But I'm going to move on from those, because those are the two kind of ones that are different. The addictive behaviors are far less dangerous than the chemical ones, but they are affecting people, and we're seeing it more and more, especially young people. Like I said, with social media, video games, and other stuff is really affecting some people. One of the ones I just thought about is there was a kid who had this cell phone, and he's addicted and walking in the street and gets hit by the car. But he was so addicted to his cell phone, the cell phone was more important than his safety. That's why it can be just as deadly as a chemical. It just doesn't have the chemical component. So, but when I have wrote down, here are some of the signs if someone, maybe you know someone, or maybe you think, well, I don't have addictions. Well, here's some of the things that happens when you have addiction. Depression, mood swings, being unreliable, being unable to finish a project that you're supposed to do, being dishonest to your friends, family, and employees. You isolate or withdraw to yourself, engage in risky behavior that you normally wouldn't do. You become quickly defensive when you wouldn't normally be defensive, and you project your feelings, you justify bad behavior. you have difficulty paying bills, difficulty in relationship, difficulty at work, and engage in illegal actions. These are some of the signs that these are not good signs in your life if these are coming up. So, what are the causes of addictions? There aren't many causes, but there's really 4 from what I can tell. And the first one is one I mentioned, which is your family. Your family. You grow up in a family, and your family might have a history of addiction. You might have an environment where they drink a lot. You might be in a situation where there's a legacy of alcoholism. And if that's the case, if you do drink, there's a more likely chance that you'll become addicted. Another one is trauma. They found more and more, a lot of people drink or do drugs or do these things or addictive behavior because they got trauma in their life and they don't know how to cope with it. And so they do these addictive alcohol, drugs, and stuff to cope with all this trauma. So again, counseling, they think, aha, I'll just drink. And a lot of the situations, I heard a lot of testimonies of how many people I heard. For example, there's one young lady whose best friend committed suicide in front of her. Think she drank afterwards? Absolutely. Broken homes, more likely to drink. A lot of people, they have trauma, and instead of dealing with the trauma, they drink. Because at least it makes them feel good for a moment. Self-medication. Now, the reason I bring this up, it relates to the 2 previous sermons. One of the things what some special needs people, especially if they have ADD or ADHD, is they try to self-medicate by drinking, by smoking, by doing drugs, and it's their way to get the dopamine. Because remember, when you have ADHD, your dopamine is low, and so you take those to medicate, but those are not good ways to medicate. There's good medication if you have ADHD, but drinking and smoking and doing drugs is not the way to do it. But that's where some people get in trouble. And I think I would be willing to bet a lot of them are that. A lot of them are people who have neurological issues and they use the addictive substances to make up for that. In reality, they just need a good medication. Last one, environmental. This is where you have high school friends, or you go off to college and everyone else is drinking or smoking or doing it, and you do it too, and there's peer pressure. And that's some of them. But those are different reasons why people do get into these addictive substances. And you see, they're not simple. A lot of us think it's just environmental, but it's not. There's a lot more complicatedness to addiction. Now, the other thing I mentioned is you don't just end up addicted. So, stages of addiction, and the first one is initial use. The first time you smoke weed, you drink a beer, you do any addictive behavior, first time someone looks at pornography, they don't care for it. They don't care for smoking. They don't care for it. And so most people, and it's a misnomer by I heard a lot of Baptists and some people say, oh, you take that first beer and you're done. No, really not the case. However, it's when they start misusing them. And instead of just having 1 beer, you have 2. The next time they have 3. The next time they have 4. And then what happens? They develop a tolerance to the beer. And what I mean by tolerance is their body chemically get used to that. And so in order to get the same effect they got before, they have to do what? Drink even more. And as they drink even more, that's when their body starts getting used to it, their body starts getting programmed to it, and now their body becomes dependent upon it. And now this is where it's locked in. See, when it was just initial use, it was, that's all right. But once you're here, you're in deep, 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 deep trouble, because it isn't far from there that you end up addicted to it. And what I mean by addicted to it is if you were to try to step away from alcohol, drugs, or even they've done an experience where they even taken young kids and took their cell phones away, and they will go through withdrawal symptoms. They'll shake, they'll be nervous, they'll be anxious. Not as bad as drugs and alcohol, but they have the same withdrawal symptoms. It doesn't last as long because, again, it's just a dopamine hit. But still, they'll start having those withdrawals, it gets harder, and then ultimately you end up in relapsing. And in fact, there's another great circle that I saw, the cycle of addiction. And maybe Joyce already knows about this. First is the frustration. So something triggers some kind of frustration. There's some drama in their life. It's maybe at work or with your wife or with your kids, and you're like, ah! And you're like, oh, if I could only have a drink, or if I only have a smoke, or if I could only just do this one thing, I would feel all better. And so they start fantasizing about taking this particular drug. The drug leads to obsession, and they start thinking that, okay, when I get home, I am just going to go, I might buy a six-pack, or I'm going to go to that store where I can get a smoke or whatever. I just need to do this, and they start obsessing on it, and eventually they engage in it. And after they engage in it, they realize they're losing control, they realize they're not making decisions, and eventually they realize, oh no, I promised my wife I'm not drinking it. I promised her I would never smoke again. I promised my kids I would never do it again. Oh no, I did it again. I feel so bad. I feel so ashamed. This is often the time when they start apologizing, and they'll tell their wife, oh, I'll never do it again. I'll never do it again. I promise, for the 100th time. And they do it again. And they promises. And when they fail to meet those promises and the trigger gets up again, they just go around the circle again and again and again. And that's why when you say, why can't you just stop? They can't. And this is why people who are addicted to substances, they really have my compassion. I mean, I feel sorry for them. They're on this road. They're on this cycle. They don't know how to get off. They don't know how to get the help they need. Eventually, and there's a cycle. This is why you never want to be on the cycle in the first point. You know, one of the things, probably the best thing we should do with our kids, you know, Richard, we should do this with the youth. I'll show you some of the YouTube videos I found of people giving their testimony of addiction. We probably should share it with them. If you show people these testimonies of people who've gone to the dark and came out the other side, it'll help people never to do it again. Because when they see what the cycle looks like, whoa, you don't want to go there. It is an ugly, ugly thing. So here's the question. How can we help break the cycle? And one of the things that the most important thing in breaking the cycle is a guy hit rock bottom. It sucks. In fact, you gotta let them hit rock bottom. You don't want to soften the touch. They need to realize they're in a problem, that they are messing up their family, they're messing up their kids, that their job has just exploded. Almost all the people testimonies I heard is they had to hit rock bottom. They had to see, if I keep going this, I'm going to die. In fact, Jamie Lee Curtis, I was one of the people. She had an addiction problem with Vicodin. And her friend, and she says, if I keep doing it, I'm going to die. And so my friend will have to come in, or she'll die now. And it's that realization, if I keep doing this, I'm going to die. Or for some people, it is they had a child, and if I keep doing this, who will take care of my child? And the first step is you gotta let them hit rock bottom and help them realizing they're hit rock bottom. If you try to stop them before then, if you try to intervene, they'll say, oh, I don't have a problem, I don't have anything, leave me alone, stop judging me. They have to hit rock bottom. Now you could say, please stop. You're killing our family, you're breaking up our family, please stop. Can't you see what you're doing to us? But they have to come to that realization. So until they say, I have a problem, nothing will change. Eventually, once they realize they have a problem, then they need to have an action plan. And maybe you can help them with that, but they need to have some plan. Okay, I realize a problem. What am I going to do? Who am I going to seek for help? Who is going to reach out to? And so they need to have an action plan, and they need to seek help. Now, seeking help is broad and wide. It depends on what's their problem. Because the problem, if you have a chemical addiction and the resources you're going to hit for that versus the other things are going to be different. But let's just consider if you have a chemical addiction. You're probably going to need a treatment. You're going to need to go to detox. You need to get, by the way, you need to get out of the area. If you stay there and try to do it, all those stressors are going to come back and you're going to end up in that cycle again. That's why they almost always suggest go to a detox center and get away from your life, because you don't want those stressors, because they'll bring you back in. In fact, I heard a testimony of this one guy. He was in a treatment center and his wife was giving birth to the third child. He said, please, can I go see my wife? And he said, no, this is a bad idea. And he went, and the stress of the third child was the trigger, and around he went again. Treatment centers are important because they need a detox. They need to get away from the stressors of life. They also need to find some kind of small group counseling people that are struggling with the same thing. That you're struggling with alcohol, or struggling with pornography, or struggling with drugs, or struggling with that they can identify and they know they're in the same thing. Then they need a counsel or someone to help them out, to guide them to the process. They might need some other help. But the one thing that as a Christian, I also will say, they need God. Because they need God to help give them the strength. They need something, a higher power that they can go to for that help. And so they need to bring God into the part of it. And they need to ask God for help. They also need to confess their sins to God, and also apologize to other people. Oh, that's another one. And they need to seek out their church family if they're still in the church scenario. But there's some point after you've been hurt, after you've gone through all this, you need to all agree that you need to do some kind of reconciliation. Now, I always say the first person you need to reconcile is with God. An amazing thing is God is quick to forgive. If we confess our sins to God, He's quick to forgive. And first you need, because once you have reconciliation and God, you realize God forgives you, it makes the next step easier, which is you need to reconcile with your family in some way. Now, sometimes it might be just a letter. There might have been some barriers put up because you've been so toxic and hurtful, but in some way you want to make atonement, because that guilt, if it stays there, if you don't deal with it, will send you back into addiction. And so that's why they always say you need to confess, you need to ask forgiveness, you need reconciliation, because until you do, you're going to go back. The next thing I would say is you need positive actions. Stuff that are positive hobbies, positive activities. You need positive people in your life, people who are encourager, because a lot of times what you had back home is you had a lot of people who are in the same problem, who are dragging you down, who are stressing you out, and you don't need people like that in your life. You need activities that give you positive. Not only that, but let's say I always tell people, if you have problems smoking, instead of grabbing a cigarette, grab a carrot or a toothpick, or find some positive action. So instead of seeking joy in marijuana, seek joy in praising God, or going rock climbing, or whatever. find some positive action instead of the negative action. Because you don't want to just say no, because if you say no, you need to say yes to something. Something else that's a positive, opposite of the negative. The last thing is, and they always suggest this, that helps you is help others. Because once you get to the end, one of the things that's going to help you move forward is now to do this for everyone. Just to be there, God has walked through you, now you help other people walk through the same thing. Because you've been through the hard thing, and now you can identify with people and need help. And if I miss anything, Mr. Joyce will fill it in. As the family members, now as family members, how can we help as family members? The first thing is, don't enable them. This is the hardest thing. For family members, we want to help them. We want to rescue them. We want to rescue them, and we want to stop the problem. I want to see, did I have it? Nope. I guess it was like that. And so we want to intervene sooner, but one of the things is, remember, we got to let them reach the bottom first. But one of the things you can do is, as they're falling, start praying for them. Start looking at resources so that when they do hit the bottom, you already know, hey, there's this one program you can go to. Be there supporting them. Support them emotionally and say, I love you, my son, my daughter, or my friend. I love you despite all of this. And when you're ready, let's move forward with this. What you don't want to do, the thing that doesn't work is shame. This was the old way we did the problem. In fact, if someone was guilty of alcoholism, we'd bring them up on stage and say, this person has had this problem. And when we shame them, that doesn't work. Because when you shame them, that triggers them, which leads back to addiction. Shame doesn't work. We've learned this. This is the thing that we have. So instead of shaming people, we need to love on them and we need to encourage them. And in fact, we need to set a positive example and say, hey, wouldn't you rather have a life that looks like this? And be that positive example. So part of what being a positive example is as Paul would say, don't walk around with a beer can. If they're struggling with alcoholism, don't be walking with a beer can. Or don't be smoking a cigarette if they're trying to quit smoking or whatever it is. Be a positive example of what you want them to be, because they need that example. They need someone to be that person. And like I said, most important, be praying for them. They need God to work mightily in them. And by the way, by you praying for them, it'll bring more empathy, more love, more encouragement for them. And you need to pray that God will help them be victorious over this addiction. Because in the end, when someone defeats it, it is a victory. And God deserves all the praise. Now I want to finish this off as I go back to the Bible real quick. And I'll just read these 3 verses real quick. The first is Matthew 11:28-30. It says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden light. Those who are struggling with alcoholism and addiction, they need to turn to Jesus. He will guide them and direct them. An older oxen would go with the younger one. They put the yoke on them, and the older one would guide them. And that's what they need. They need God to guide them and direct them, to give them strength, to give them faith, to build them up. And so Jesus is quick there to offer that guidance to them. The next one is 1 Corinthians 10:13. It says, no temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide you a way of escape also, that you will not endure it. And this is important. It means that God will leave an opening. He will help you find a way out. He has not forsaken you. He has not abandoned you. But the other important thing is here. He says, Your temptation, that addiction is not new. People have struggled with that. You are not alone in this. Therefore, God is there. God is going to lead you. Don't feel alone. Don't feel ashamed. The worst thing you can do is keep an addiction in hiding. That's where Satan likes you to keep it. But the way you deal with addiction is expose it to the light and say, yes, I have a problem. And that's why I always start with, hello, my name is Jared Olson, and I'm addicted to coffee. Well, that's just me. But you're addicted to stuff. It is bringing it to the light so people know what the problem is, and you're not alone, and you're saying, I need God's help to get me through it. And God will make a way out. Last one is Romans 5, 3 through 5. And just read this real quick. And not only this, but we also boast in affliction, knowing that affliction brings out perseverance, and then perseverance provides character, and proving character, and proving character hope. And hope does not put to shame, because the love of God has been poured out within our hearts through the Holy Spirit who is given to us. Now, one of my points is here, is that when God brings you difficulties, addiction of any kind, we're talking about alcohol, drugs, Facebook, pornography, name the addiction, that God, if he works through it, he will use that addiction, he will use that trouble to build you up and strengthen you. And I can't tell you how many of these people who went through the process, I listened to the testimony, and it came out to the other side, and wow, their life is so much stronger. In fact, they're probably stronger than you and me, because they went down to the very depths and came back up, and they're stronger than ever. And God will make you stronger through this. It will not defeat you. God will make you triumphant, and victory shall be yours in Christ. But again, that is why we need Christ. And one of the things that Christ did when he died on the cross was to set us free from drugs and addictions. And all the sins of the world were nailed at the cross so you could be set free. And let's finish up with one quick saying, which is this. May you be set free from your addiction, whatever they may be, and may you help others be set free from their addictions. Let me just close in prayer real quick. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this time. If you like these videos, please like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell. God bless you, and have a good day.